At midnight, in a remote Montana cabin, the lights go out and the blizzard takes the house in its fist. The wind does not knock. It howls. It leans against the walls like something alive, while inside, a father stands near the fireplace, holding a black iron poker, scraping its tip across the stone hearth again and again. That small sound is the only rhythm left. The woodpile is lower than he thought. The room is colder than he wants to admit. And somewhere behind him, his family is waiting to see whether his face will become a warning or a shelter. This is where panic becomes tempting. Not because he is weak, but because love has made the stakes unbearable. What does a man do when fear is not for himself, but for the people depending on him? This is the Fudoshin mindset, not escaping the storm, but learning how to stand correctly inside it. The first enemy in that cabin is not the cold. The cold is honest. It enters the room slowly. It touches the window glass, creeps under the doorframe, settles into the floorboards, and tells the truth without drama. Heat is limited, time is moving, and comfort is no longer guaranteed. The first enemy is the story the mind begins to build around the cold. A father can look at a shrinking stack of firewood and see more than split pine. He can see the road buried under snow. He can see the truck useless under a white drift. He can see the phone battery falling lower, the power lines down somewhere beyond the black trees, the nearest neighbor too far to matter. He can see his children trying not to look afraid. He can hear his wife keeping her voice steady in the next room, not because she is calm, but because she is helping him hold the room together. That is the pressure of P1, Fudoshin. Not peace after the storm is over. Command while the storm is still speaking. He stands beside the fireplace, and the poker feels heavier than it should. The iron is cold near the handle where the heat has not reached. Every few seconds, he drags the tip across the stone hearth. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Outside, the wind throws itself against the cabin. Inside, the poker makes a smaller sound, a human sound, a rhythm that still belongs to him. But the shadow is already moving. The urge to panic does not always arrive as screaming. Sometimes it arrives as speed. He wants to check everything at once. The windows. The door. The woodpile. The batteries. The children's blankets. The weather app that will not load. The road he cannot see. He wants to ask the same question 5 times, because repetition can feel like control when real control has disappeared. Is it getting colder? How much wood is left? What if this lasts until morning? What if the pipes freeze? What if I should have prepared better? That last question cuts deepest, because it turns the blizzard into a courtroom. Now the father is not just managing a hard night. He is prosecuting himself in the dark. This is where many people lose command. Not because they lack courage. Not because they do not care. They lose command because the mind mistakes concern for usefulness. It believes that if fear is loud enough, it is doing its job. It believes that if the body stays tense, the family is safer. It believes that if the father imagines every possible disaster, he is protecting everyone from surprise. But fear has a strange hunger. Feed it every possible future, and it does not become satisfied. It asks for more. The cabin becomes smaller. The room tightens. The father's breath climbs into his chest. His jaw locks. He stops seeing the actual room and starts living inside the worst version of the next 6 hours. His family does not need that version of him. They do not need a man pretending the storm is harmless. That would be foolish. They do not need a man acting invincible. That would be theater. They need someone who can look directly at the danger without handing his mind over to it. That is the difference. Fudoshin is often misunderstood as an unshakable mind, as if the disciplined person feels nothing. But in a cabin like this, feeling nothing would not be wisdom. A father who feels nothing when the heat is low and his family is cold is not disciplined. He is disconnected. The Fudoshin mindset is not emotional emptiness. It is emotional command. Fear is allowed to report. It is not allowed to rule. So the father lets the first wave pass through his body without obeying it. He notices the urge to move too fast. He notices the desire to speak sharply, to snap at a small question, to make his family pay for the pressure he feels in his own chest. He notices the old instinct to become hard because softness feels dangerous. That instinct is common in men under pressure. A man gets scared, but fear embarrasses him, so it comes out as irritation. A child asks, "Are we okay?" And instead of answering the fear beneath the question, he hears it as another demand. He wants to say, "Stop asking me that." He wants silence, because silence would make it easier to pretend he is not afraid. But discipline catches him before his mouth does damage. He looks at the fireplace poker in his hand. Scrape. Pause. The sound is still there. Thin, rough, steady. The wind is bigger, but the poker is closer. That is where command begins, not with the entire storm, but with the nearest thing he can govern. Outside, the blizzard is massive. It covers roads, buries tracks, bends tree limbs, and erases distance. It turns Montana into a white wall. No amount of panic will move it 1 inch. No amount of self-blame will bring the power back. No amount of pacing will multiply the wood. Inside, the battlefield is smaller. There is a hearth. There is a family. There is a remaining stack of wood. There are blankets, doors, windows, voices, faces, and the next decision. Not the whole night. Not the whole winter. Not every mistake he has ever made. The next decision. A reactive father tries to defeat the entire blizzard in his head. A disciplined father reduces the night to what can be held in his hands. That does not make him passive. It makes him useful. He does not need to look fearless. He needs to become clear. He does not need to promise what he cannot control. He needs to stop leaking panic into the room. He needs to make his presence warmer than the temperature. So he sets the poker down carefully instead of throwing it back against the hearth. That small restraint matters. Under pressure, the body is always voting. A slammed tool says, "I am losing command." A tool returned with care says, "We still have order here." His family will read that before they read his words. They will read his shoulders. His pace. His tone. The way he looks at the fire. The way he answers a question. The way he handles the poker. The way he uses silence. Children especially understand atmosphere before explanation. They know when an adult has become a storm inside the storm. The father knows this too. That knowledge does not make him perfect. His heart is still beating harder than usual. His thoughts still try to run ahead. The cold is still entering the cabin. The wood is still low. The wind is still louder than any human plan. But something in him begins to separate. There is the storm outside. There is the fear inside. And there is the part of him that can watch both without becoming either one. That part is the beginning of Fudoshin. It is the part that says, lower your voice. Count what remains. Keep your hand steady. Speak only what helps. Do not infect the room with imagined disaster. Do not lie, but do not collapse. Let the fire be small if it must be small, but let your mind be exact. The fireplace poker becomes more than a tool now. At first, it was just iron. Then it became a nervous habit, scraping stone while fear searched for somewhere to go. But now it becomes a measure of command. Each time he touches it, he is reminded that force without steadiness is waste. That heat must be tended, not demanded. That the mind, like a fire, can either flare wildly and burn through its fuel, or be managed with patience. This is the confrontation beneath the confrontation. The visible problem is a power outage in a remote cabin during a heavy blizzard. The real test is whether the father will become another source of danger through panic, or another source of shelter through command. He cannot control the wind. He can control the next breath before he answers his family. He cannot control how long the power stays out. He can control whether he turns uncertainty into anger. He cannot control the size of the storm. He can control the size of the task in front of him. And in that difference, the Fudoshin mindset stops being an idea. It becomes a posture beside the fire. It becomes a hand resting on black iron. It becomes a father choosing not to let fear speak through his face. The blizzard may own the mountain, but it does not have to own the room. Discipline does not begin after you feel calm. It begins in the first second you realize you are about to lose command. That second is small, almost invisible. It comes before the raised voice, before the rushed decision, before the father turns his fear into motion and calls it responsibility. It comes when his hand tightens around the fireplace poker and the scraping gets faster than it needs to be. Scrape. 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 Then he stops. Not because the storm has softened. Not because the cabin is suddenly warm. He stops because his own speed has become part of the problem. The first practice is interruption. He lets the poker rest against the stone hearth. He does not throw it down. He does not pace toward the window again. He does not ask the same question into a room that already knows the answer. He stands still long enough to hear the difference between the wind and his own mind. Outside, the blizzard is howling. Inside, his thoughts are trying to imitate it. So he names the truth silently. I am afraid for them. That is all. No speech. No performance. No pretending. Just the clean sentence inside his own skull. He is not weak because the sentence exists. He is only in danger if he lets that sentence take the wheel. The second practice is returning to the body. His boots are on the floor. His shoulders are too high. His breath is too shallow. His hand is still near the poker, still wanting something to grip. So he takes one slow breath through his nose and lets it leave through his mouth without making a ceremony out of it. Then another. He lowers his shoulders. He places his palm on the mantle, feeling the dry wood, the faint warmth, the dust that has settled there during better days. The fireplace poker becomes his anchor again. He picks it up, but now differently. Not as a nervous habit. Not as a symbol of frustration. He holds it like a tool. A simple thing with a simple purpose. He uses it to settle the burning wood, not attack it. He nudges one piece inward. He opens a pocket of air beneath the coals. He watches the small orange life answer. This is how command returns. Not through a speech. Through correct contact with one real object. The third practice is shrinking the battle. A panicked mind tries to solve the whole night at once. It wants certainty about the power grid, the road, the temperature, the children, the morning, the mistake of not bringing in more wood before dark. It wants to stand in midnight and demand a signed contract from dawn. But dawn does not negotiate. So the father brings the war down to the next 10 minutes. Not the whole blizzard. 10 minutes. He counts the remaining logs without drama. He separates the dry pieces from the damp ones. He decides how often the fire will be fed, not based on fear, but based on use. He checks the cabin door with his hand, feeling for drafts. He rolls a towel along the bottom edge where the cold is slipping through. He asks for blankets to be gathered in one room, not because he wants to frighten anyone, but because one shared warm space is wiser than 4 cold corners. He does not make his family run. He gives them jobs small enough to complete. You bring the blankets. You check the flashlight. You sit near your brother. Keep your socks on. The words are plain. That is their strength. A frightened family does not need poetry. It needs sequence. The fourth practice is protecting the atmosphere. This is harder than checking doors. Harder than counting wood. Harder than tending a fire. Because the atmosphere of a home is shaped by the person who carries the most pressure. The father wants to say too much. He wants to explain every possible problem, because explanation can feel like honesty. But there is a kind of honesty that helps, and there is a kind that only dumps the weight of adult fear onto smaller shoulders. So he chooses his words like fuel. Not too many. Not too hot. Not wasted. We're going to keep everyone in this room. We're going to keep the fire steady. We're going to handle one thing at a time. He does not promise that the power will come back soon. He does not say the night is easy. He does not lie to purchase a cheap calm that will break later. He gives his family something better than a prediction. He gives them his steadiness. Then he returns to the hearth. Scrape. Pause. This time the sound is slower. The poker touches stone with intention. The same sound that once revealed his fear now trains his rhythm. The wind still howls beyond the walls, but the scraping has become a metronome for the room. The fifth practice is turning necessity into ritual. He creates a simple cycle. Check the fire. Check the door. Check the blankets. Check his voice. Check his breath. Then repeat. Not obsessively. Not frantically. With space between each action. Every cycle teaches the mind that survival in pressure is not one heroic act. It is a chain of small correct acts performed without surrendering the inner room. This is Shugyo inside Fudoshin. Training inside the storm. No dojo. No polished floor. No applause. Just a father at midnight in Montana, learning that the mind can be trained while the wind is trying to untrain it. He keeps the poker near the hearth, always return to the same place. That matters. Tools left scattered become another message of disorder. A tool returned to its place tells the room, we still have structure. He keeps the fire low enough to conserve wood, strong enough to protect warmth. That balance matters too. Panic burns fast. Command burns clean. He checks his own face before he turns toward his family. Not in a mirror. In the moment before speech. He loosens his jaw. He softens his eyes without making them empty. He lets concern remain, but refuses to let it become alarm. A child asks again, are we going to be okay? There it is. The test inside the test. His first impulse is irritation. The question lands on the bruise of his own uncertainty. But he does not answer from the bruise. He answers from command. We're doing the right things right now. That sentence is enough. Not grand. Not dramatic. True enough to stand on. The storm wants him scattered across every possible fear. The practice keeps bringing him back to what is present: the fire, the stone, the poker, the breath, the next useful act. And each return builds something the blizzard cannot see. A steadier nervous system in the room. A father whose care is not leaking out as panic. A family learning that calm is not the absence of danger, but the presence of order. The wind keeps howling. The poker keeps scraping. But now the rhythm belongs to discipline. By 1 in the morning, the cabin has changed. Not because the storm has weakened. It has not. The blizzard still presses against the windows with a white, blind force. Snow still moves across the glass in violent sheets. The trees outside still bend and vanish, as if the mountain itself is breathing through clenched teeth. The power is still out. The road is still buried. The wood is still limited. But the room is no longer being ruled by those facts. That is the first sign of transformation. The outside world has not become gentle. The father has become more exact. He moves slower now, and because he moves slower, everyone else begins to move slower with him. He does not drift from window to window like a man searching for permission to panic. He does not stare at the dead light switch. He does not keep checking the phone for a signal that the storm refuses to give. He has accepted the shape of the night. Acceptance does not mean surrender. It means he has stopped wasting strength arguing with reality. He kneels near the hearth and reaches for the fireplace poker. The iron is warmer now near the hooked end, dark with soot, familiar in his hand. Earlier, it carried his fear. Every scrape against the stone was a little confession that his mind was running faster than the room could survive. Now the poker has become something else. It is not a weapon against the storm. It is not a place to put frustration. It is a reminder. A tool has no panic in it. Only purpose. He draws the coals together with care. A dull red glow gathers under the ash. He places one split log on the fire, not two, though fear still tries to whisper that more flame means more safety. He knows better now. A fire that burns too fast can betray you before morning. So he chooses steadiness over spectacle. That choice reaches farther than the hearth. His family watches without being told to watch. They notice how he handles the poker. They notice that the scrape has slowed. They notice that he is not pretending everything is fine, but he is not letting fear set the tone either. His calm is no longer an act. It has become useful. This is what people misunderstand about strength. They think strength is volume. They think it is certainty. They think it is the ability to dominate the room with answers. But in that Montana cabin, strength looks quieter than that. It looks like a father checking the blankets without making a crisis out of it. It looks like him asking his child to move closer to the fire with a voice that does not tremble and does not harden. It looks like him giving his wife a look that says, "I see the danger, and I am still here." No performance. No collapse. Just presence. The wind rises again. It hits the cabin so hard that one of the windows gives a low wooden groan. A child flinches. The father hears it. He turns, and for a brief moment the old impulse returns. The body remembers panic quickly. His chest tightens. His mind reaches for the worst picture again. But this time, the picture does not take him. He takes one breath before he speaks. "That's just the wind pushing against the frame," he says. "The cabin is holding." The sentence lands. Not because it solves everything. Because it gives shape to the sound. Fear grows in the unnamed. Command begins when the room knows what it is hearing. The child nods, still afraid, but no longer alone inside the fear. That matters. A father cannot remove every storm from his family's life. He cannot guarantee that every road will stay open, every light will stay on, every plan will survive the weather. But he can teach something deeper by the way he stands when certainty disappears. He can teach that fear is information, not a master. He can teach that a home is not only built from wood, wires, and heat. It is built from the nervous system of the people inside it. He can teach that the strongest person in the room is not the one who feels nothing. It is the one who can feel the full weight of responsibility and still choose the next right action. The cabin settles into a different rhythm. The wind howls. The fire answers. The poker scrapes. The father breathes. Every sound has its place now. Earlier, the howl of the wind and the scrape of the poker were enemies. One was the chaos outside. The other was the chaos inside trying to disguise itself as movement. But now the contrast has changed. The wind is still wild, but the scraping has become measured. The storm is still loud, but the room has found a human rhythm underneath it. That is Fudoshin. Not a frozen mind. Not a blank face. Not some ancient pose borrowed from a world that does not belong to this cabin. Modern Fudoshin is a father at midnight choosing not to become another emergency. It is the discipline to stop before the sharp word. The discipline to count what remains instead of cursing what is gone. The discipline to make the next action small enough to complete. The discipline to let love make you responsible without letting it make you frantic. And slowly, the room begins to trust the rhythm. The children lean into their blankets. His wife stops scanning his face for signs of bad news. The father returns the poker to the same place beside the hearth, where anyone can reach it if needed. He does it with care, almost ceremony, though no one would call it that. A simple tool. A simple place. A simple order held against a massive night. He sits near the fire, not as a man who has conquered the blizzard, but as a man who has stopped giving the blizzard authority over his mind. His hands are still rough from carrying wood. His eyes are still tired. He still does not know when the power will return. The transformation is not that he feels safe. The transformation is that he has become safe to be near. There is a difference. A panicked man demands that the world calm down before he can be steady. A disciplined man begins with the only territory that is truly his breath, his hands, his voice, his next decision. The mountain remains covered in snow. The dark remains outside the glass. The night remains long. But inside the cabin, the father has drawn a boundary the storm cannot cross. The blizzard can take the road. It can take the power. It can take the easy version of the night. But it cannot take command unless he hands it over. Most people will never face a midnight blizzard in a remote Montana cabin. But everyone has a room where the power goes out. A kitchen after bad news. A hospital hallway. A silent car ride home. A bill on the counter. A family looking at your face to know whether the moment is survivable. Your storm may not be snow. It may be pressure, failure, uncertainty, responsibility, or fear for someone you love. And when that storm comes, the question is not whether you feel fear. You will. The question is whether fear gets your hands, your voice, your face, and your next decision. So remember the father beside the fire. Remember the poker on stone. Remember that command is built in small movements when the night is still long. If this lesson belongs in your life, carry it quietly. Fear can speak, but it does not get to command.